あーこれは、あれですね。リエリーポイントですね。
いや、これはスタンレーパークの
あ、
戦没
サンレ
者、
パークだ。あ、そうそうそうそう。そこ
白田、
見に行かな。あ、もう咲いてるんですか？
まだです、まだです。これは去年の今頃です。あ、
あ、
今
そう。
頃じゃない。4月
あ
ですね。4月
あ、
になっ
あ、遅いって言われましたね、ちょっと。
ね、今年はね。うん、
はい。
上手に書けないから苦しんでるんです。
うん、
It's time now, so I'm going to just mute you all once, and you can all unmute if you have questions or okay. So I'd like to just begin with an embassy. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our winter lecture series. Um, Last week, of course, I asked to take a break because last week, Monday, I had the good opportunity or good fortune to join 40, I think 46 other monks and 80 something lay individuals as we went to uh, the parliament in Victoria, the provincial parliament, um, to support the Teresa Watt, who is the member of Legislative Assembly from our from Richmond Central or North, and she was introducing a private member's bill to try to get the provincial government to officially recognize the first Sunday of May as a Buddhist cultural day. So there was about 120 of us that sat in the gallery when Teresa Watt read this private members bill or introduced this private members bill. And then following sitting in on the assembly, they have they call it the Hall of Honor, I think it is. Right outside the assembly, there's this hall, a gathering space, and there they set up a makeshift altar, and all the Buddhist monks and nuns and myself and Roy Sensei included, we blessed the MLAs and the parliament. So each group had their own unique chanting, and it was very beautiful, very moving. Um, the downside might be the fact that Teresa Watt is from the opposition party. She's liberal, and according to the rules of the Parliamentary Assembly, um, any members of Legislative Assembly are allowed to introduce a private member's bill. However, it's up to the sitting government to see whether they want to debate that or not, and then enact on that. And apparently, up until this point, the opposition party has put up 30 something private members bill or introduced, and the sitting government, the NDP, has not taken up one to debate. So we'll see what happens. Um, After the assembly, when we gathered in the Hall of Honor, uh, David Eby was there as well, the premier, and he did make a verbal commitment saying that he has no problems in acknowledging this. So hopefully, we'll have this recognized officially. So, anyways, with that, so last week, of course, because of that, I just didn't have the time to prepare. Plus the fact that that weekend was also our Shotsuki weekend, as well as our no, that weekend was the deadline for our newsletter. So lots of things going on. Anyways, so today I wanted to continue off where we left off last time. So of course we've been going through the Shoshinge, the true hymn on Shinjin and Nembutsu, Shinjin faith and Nembutsu, and where we stopped off last time, I was trying to explain about this ichinen, the concept of ichinen, where in many cases, ichinen can mean one thought or one recitation of the name of the Buddha. Or the other example I gave was that it's also the briefest time measurement according to Buddhism. We call it setsuna in Japanese, and it's the shortest time. But Shinna used this ichinen as in a little different manner, and he said that in fact ichinen is that instant when the entrusting heart is received through receiving the sincere mind of the Buddha, and our entrusting heart comes about, and we receive it with joy. And so that's what I was talking about last time. And an example of, or I thought a beautiful expression of this ichinen was written in a book by Reverend Kenyu Tsuji. Reverend Kenyu Tsuji, some of you may know him. Most of you probably don't know him. He was, in fact, a Canadian, born here, and he went to Japan just before World War II to study to become a Buddhist minister. And he came back just before the war started, and he became the first minister in Toronto at the Toronto Buddhist Church. So he was the founding minister of the Toronto Buddhist Church. This was in the 50s, I believe, after the war, that he started the Toronto Buddhist Church. And so from there, he actually went from Toronto to become the first bishop, or not the first bishop, but he became the bishop of the Buddhist churches. Well, he went down first as a minister to the States. Back then, both Canada and the States, we were under one umbrella. And so he went down to head the education department for what was then known as the Buddhist Church of America, that included Canada as well. And then he went on to become the bishop of Buddhist Churches of America. And he was a very dynamic minister who I got to get to know when I was a minister in Toronto. One of the things that, by that time, Reverend Tsuji had he had retired as the bishop, and he had started on his, I guess his final project as a minister was he founded a temple called Ekoji in Virginia, just beside Washington, D.C. He felt it was important to have a temple by the U.S. Capitol. So he started this Ekoji Temple. Ekoji Temple is actually sponsored by the group called the Bukkyo Dendo Kyokai, or the Buddha Dharma Foundation. And this foundation was originated by a person by the name of Mr. Numata, who was friends with Reverend Tsuji. Anyways, so Reverend Tsuji was the minister that started this Ekoji Temple right by Washington, D.C. So when I was a minister in Toronto, once a year we would have a ministers gathering. He would invite ministers from Eastern USA, but also the ministers who were in Toronto would be invited, and we would go down for usually a weekend Dharma session. And I've always found him very outgoing and inquisitive and encouraging. Anything that any one of us would say. And I was still, so when I first got to Toronto in 1992, so I was 27, I guess. So still a very, very a young kid. But whenever we would talk about anything, the first thing that would come out of Tsuji Sensei's mouth was wonderful, wonderful, and he's always very encouraging to all senses. And after he's passed away now some while back, but after he passed away, some of his followers at the Ekoji Temple, they produced a book. Got it in my office. I forgot to bring it out. It's a very short read, but a wonderful book to read. And in there are a collection of some of Tsuji Sensei's writings, his Dharma talks, as well as some of the poems that he had written. And this one in particular, is Eternal Now, is a very popular poem. And I'm going to, let me just, hang on a second. Oh, no, I know. Where's that? Sorry. Let me just share with you on the screen. Okay, you can see that now, right? So I sent this out earlier today, so I think most of you should already have it. But it's entitled Eternal Now. And it really sums up, I think, this idea of Ichinen. Eternal now. In the beginningless, endless flow of time, each life is a mere ripple, existing only for an instantaneous moment and disappearing forever. But each life is a unique experience with beauty and truth all of its own, with no identical counterpart in history and none absolutely the same in the future. Your life, my life, is attuned to the rhythm of the cosmos and to the heartbeat of reality. Each life exists in the eternal now. Each idea that is thought, each word that is spoken, each action that is taken changes the whole pattern of the universe. For the universe is interdependent. Think, speak, and act then, always in the eternal now, with compassion and understanding for your own enlightenment, but for the enlightenment of all sentient beings. Right? So he's talking about how our existence, even though it's very short, when we talk in a more universal grand scale, a human lifespan is very short. 100 years is a blink of an eye, not even a blink of an eye. And yet, in that very instant, in that moment, what he calls it, the eternal now. Every moment that we exist, every moment that is experienced is an eternal now. It is a single moment, yet at the same time, it's interconnected with the universe. Everything that we think, everything that we say, everything we do also affects the universe. It might be in a very, 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 very small manner, and yet we do affect the universe as well. And I think this is what Shinran Shonin was also talking about when he talks about the one thought moment of joy. It was that moment when there's a realization of the eternal now, the moment when he realizes, I am one with the universe. Now, what's very interesting about the poem by Tsuji Sensei, um, because he wanted to introduce Buddhism to the West, you can see that he doesn't really use very technical terms in this poem. They're all terms that are more commonly used in the English language, and I think it makes it very accessible to the people. But this idea of the interdependence of the universe is another way of expressing what we call the working of Amida Buddha. And so I think this is a beautiful way that Tsuji Sensei had exemplified this one thought moment of joy. So now getting back to Shoshinge, the verse, the passages that I wanted to go through this evening, and it's again, it's an extremely slow process, but each word is so there's so much meaning behind each of these that I wanted to take time to look at it. And today, in particular, so Shinran writes in this Shoshinge, he says, when the one thought moment of joy arises, nirvana is attained without severing blind passions. And this word here, in Japanese, we call it bonno, bonno, or in Sanskrit, it's klesha, klesha. And it is translated here as blind passions. Okay? Sometimes this blind passions, they will use other human defilements, etc. There's a number of translations for it. But it's very important for us to know this term, bonno, blind passions, because Shinran Shonin actually repeats it numerous times throughout his writings. And so I wanted to talk this evening a little bit about this, what we call the blind passions or bonno. So in Shinran's writings, probably one of the most famous phrases that he uses is we see it in various passages. He says, bonno gusoku no bonbu in Japanese, or beings full of blind passions. So we are, in fact, these beings that are full of blind passions. Now, this word bonno is very common to Japanese, but you know, it's funny because I think most Japanese or many Japanese have heard of this word, but they really don't know the meaning behind it, right? So the most famous or commonly associated usage of this word in Japan is on New Year's Eve. So on New Year's Eve, it's said that people go to the temples to listen to the striking of the temple bell. And it's said that on New Year's Eve at the temples in Japan, throughout Japan, they ring the temple bells 108 times. And 108 is to define the number of blind passions or human defilements that we have. So on New Year's Eve, as people go to the temples to listen to the temple bells, it's said as the sound of the bell goes off into the midnight air, also we are reminded of our human defilements and passions, but also all the things from the previous year, they also go off in the midnight air and we start afresh. Okay. So this is where most Japanese can associate with this blind passions. Oh, and I wanted to introduce something to you and I forgot it. I'll be right back. I'm just going to my office, so I forgot to bring something. state that. Okay, sure. I'm gonna stop sharing for just a second because I want to share with you. Okay, so let's see which one do I want. Okay, I'll use this one here. So first of all, the book that I was talking about is this one here, called, and it's called The Heart of the Buddha Dharma. And there's a picture of Tsuji Sensei on the back here. Some of you might recognize his picture. Okay. But anyways, what I wanted to show you was these beads. You
I
can
think
see-
you're using the wrong camera.
Oh, you can't see them?
Nope.
You can't see it? Really?
Is it just me?
Can you see the beads, everyone?
I can see because there are two pictures of you. There are two,
Yeah, I've got two pictures up here. So you can't see it when I do this?
Can I
Okay.
can see?
You can see it, can't you? Well, anyways.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. So these beads, okay, are more traditional beads. I can show it this way too. Okay. And this camera's closer. That's why I was showing it on here.
Yeah.
You can see it, right?
Yep.
So, anyways, with this, with these beads, okay, so there are actually 108 beads on here.
Yeah.
And there are special beads at the end here. We call these beads here oyadama, or the parent bead. Okay. And there are also some smaller beads along the way. So one is after the 7th, and one is after the 21st, right? And so what these beads are were counting beads. So in the Buddhist practice, although we don't do it in Jodo Shinshu, in many schools of Buddhism, they will use beads like this to help them with their practice. And they will count off as they are doing, let's say they're reciting Namo Amida Butsu as an example. Actually, when we went to Victoria on the Monday, there were a number of members who had these little gadgets on their fingers. And I wasn't sure what it almost looks like, when you go into a hospital and they take your pulse beat by putting that little thing on your finger, right? It almost looked sort of like that, but it was a little bigger, not bigger, but it sat on sort of where you would put a ring, and it had a little screen on it. And I asked them what that was, and they said it was a counter. So whenever they would recite, and most of these people were Pure Land Buddhists, so they would say whenever they recite Namo Amidafa, which is Namo Amida Butsu, they would click on this thing and it would count. So it would tell them how many times they recited the Nembutsu. So, most of us have seen the Fitbits that take, my mom always says, oh, I walked so many steps today. Well, you have these gadgets now that you can count how many times you recite Namo Amida Butsu. So maybe we could try getting some of those. Instead of Fitbits, we could count how many times we're reciting the Nembutsu. Anyways, sorry, that's here nor there. But these beads, they would count as they would do it. Then there are 108 on here. Again, that's to represent the 108 klesha or defilements or blind passions that we have. And what's interesting about it, and that's really fascinating, is that on the end you have a string of more beads. Okay? And this one I'd have to. Camera's too far away. I can zoom in if I wanted to. But anyways, so what you have is you have 10 beads here, and then you actually have 10 more beads here. Okay. And then you've got 2 larger beads at the very end here. And what they would do is in their practice, once they count 108 once, they would mark it on this level. So 108 once, 108 twice, 108 3 times, 108 4 times, 108 5 times. So on this level here, on the second level, they could go up to 1,080 counts of the beads. And then the next level, 1,080 once, 1,080 twice. So they can do another, so 1,080 times 10. So that's what, 10,800? Is it 10,800 counts that they can do here? And then they have 2 larger ones, so you could multiply that by 2, right? So you could do 20,000 chants of whatever you're chanting. Okay, so that they use it as a counter. But that 108, right? It comes again from the 108. It says. So where does Buddhism actually get this number 108 from? And there are several explanations actually. One is stated that in one of the early writings that were left, or one of the early writings that were recorded, called the Abhidharma Kosa. Oh, I'm missing an A there. That should be Abhidharma Kosa. Abhidharma Kosa is a selection of it's a philosophy, I guess. And in there, they actually list 108 defilements. And I didn't list them all here because many of them are repetitive and very similar. But it's listed in there. And it's said that by understanding the 4 noble truths, the truth of suffering, the truth of causation of suffering, the truth of cessation of suffering, and the truth of the path to the cessation of suffering, the 4 noble truths, these defilements can be eradicated. Okay, so that's listed in the Abhidharma Kosa, that through your practice, basically, you can rid yourself of these defilements. The other explanation that is, I think, more popular, in particular in Japan, it's much more popular, is that it's a mathematical equation how you get 108. So the word klesha itself, or blind passions, is defined as, it's a Sanskrit word, and it's defined as a mental state that clouds the mind and manifests itself in unwholesome actions. Okay? So it's this mental states that clouds the mind. So in this equation that they use, okay, is first of all, they say you have 5 sensory cognitions, and that correspond to our sensory organs. And these are the cognitions of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. Okay, so those are the 5 sensory cognitions. And then with that, these are all basically attached with the mind, and the mind is considered the 6th cognition. But because the mind is self-centered, we view things. We have a skewed way of having these cognitions. So we view things from only our own perspective. There's a very famous Japanese, well, it was a book, but then it became a movie, and it was actually directed by the director Akira Kurosawa, and it's called Rashomon. Have any of you heard of this movie, Rashomon?
Yeah.
I know the Hashimoto's have, and my mother has, but
Yes.
okay. And it's basically about an incident that happens, and there were, I think, I saw it many years ago. There are 3, I think, main characters, and they all talk about the same incident, but they all see it from a different perspective. And it's this whole idea of what is really true, because each of them have their own perspective. And so we take our 5 sensory cognitions with the mind, because it's attached to the mind. We always have our own perspective, if you will. It's a very skewed perspective. And then from there, it says that, so that makes up 6, okay? And each experience that you have can be categorized as either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Okay, so any experience that you have, you can either feel not blasé or not feeling much about it, or you can like it, or you can dislike it. So 3 times 6, that makes up 18. Okay. Then each of these 18 experiences can lead to desire to continue it, something that's pleasurable, or not to continue it, something that is unpleasurable. Okay, so 18 times 2, and you get 36. And each of these 36 experiences have either occurred in the past, are occurring in the present, or will occur in the future. And so 3 times 36, and that's how you end up with 108. So if anybody asks you where does 108 comes from, now you know. Okay, you can say it's this mathematical equation. Okay, but regardless of whether you use this equation, come up with 108, or you use the other from the Abhidharma Kosa, the listing of 108 defilements, they can really be narrowed or brought down to what we call the 3 root or 3 poisons. And I've mentioned them before: greed, anger, and ignorance, or sometimes, as Ken Tanaka says now, commonly uses the word stupidity. And he uses the acronym GAS: greed, anger, and stupidity, right? And his talk is often, he'll say that gas is something that is embarrassing, and it could cause suffering for yourself and those around you. And in fact, when we think about our greed, anger, and ignorance, so according to the Buddhist tenets of Buddhist teaching, is that it is the klesha, which is the root of the suffering. And so general Buddhism would state that what we have to do is find the root cause of our suffering, and then through practice, you eradicate that suffering. Okay, so whether it's, where did I put my beads? They disappeared. Oh, it's falling down. I dropped it accidentally. So, whether it's counting one of these to remind yourself of the whole idea in the Buddhist teaching was that through your diligence and practice, you would rid yourself of these defilements. Okay. So, when Shinran Shoni in the Shoshinge, so if we go back to the Shoshinge, should be up now, okay. And we go back to today's passage, Shinran says here, nirvana is attained without severing blind passions. Nirvana is attained without severing blind passions. So when you take a quick glance at this, this appears to be in conflict with what the tenets of Buddhism say, because it says through our practice, right? You're supposed to eradicate those blind passions or the three evils, right? You're supposed to control yourself and be able to, so basically what they say is through your practice, through your dedication and practice, you extinguish the flames of blind passion. And that's exactly what nirvana means. Nirvana means to extinguish the flames, right? So when Shinran says in the Shoshinge, nirvana is attained without severing blind passions. What do you think of that? Maybe I'll pause here for a second, get your input into this. So, any comments on this? Where is everybody here? I'm gonna put it my view. Yeah, gallery. Any comments on that? Michael, you're always good for a comment.
Well, I'm just thinking it's for me it ties in with our Bompu nature, and then you have the corresponding benefits of Amida's compassion.
Okay.
So that's what's working when nirvana is attained without severing blind passions.
Okay. Thank you. How about somebody else? Naomi, you want to say something?
I'd
comment?
say because it's almost impossible to do it in this lively form.
Ah,
But I like Michael's idea of somehow that we are embraced in this compassion. So, but putting it together looks like a good idea.
hmm. How about Debbie? Or am I putting you on the spot if I ask you this? Okay. Hashimoto-san, what? Did you want to comment
I-
something?
I think Shinran never reached to that point. Therefore, he witnessed. So that's the way I think. I should accept that idea without suffering blind passions.
Mm.
It's impossible. I agree with the other lady.
Mm-mm.
I think without the blind passion, goodness of the human being will be partially lost.
Oh. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
For instance, if I love my children or husband or family, I will do many things, maybe not good to other people. For instance, if there is only 10 potatoes and I have to get these 10 potatoes, like I'm watching too much news in Ukrainian things. If there is not enough food, I will save it for my family,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is a very human thing. And
Mm.
without it, I don't think I am a good person.
Oh, well, it's funny you mentioned that because that's exactly the story of Obon. In the Obon, in that one, that Moggallana, who is the disciple of the Buddha, he sees his mother, who treated him very well when she was alive. He sees her suffering in what we call the realm of hungry ghosts, and he tries to save her, of course, but he's unable to do that in his by himself. And when he goes to see the Buddha tells him exactly that. He said, "Your mother is suffering now because in order to feed you when she was alive, she stole from others and she mistreated others." So blind passions, love is also included very much in blind passions. Love can very easily turn into hatred and anger as well. So it's like the flip side of a coin, you know. I always I when I was a student in Japan, we we used to go once a month. There was a person there. His name was Dennis Yoshikawa. He and his wife, Dennis and Yoko Yoshikawa, they had a temple called Chogenji. Dennis was from the States, and he went to Japan to study to become a Buddhist minister. And originally, his plans were to come back to the States to become a minister over here. But as things would go, he fell in love when he was going to school in Japan to the only daughter of a temple in Kyoto. So instead of coming back, he ended up becoming a minister in Kyoto. He's passed on now, but he's quite a number of years senior than myself. So when I was studying in Japan, Dennis and Yoko, once a month, they would invite the foreign students. And this was, I guess, his penance or the way for him to give back was what he did. What they did was once a month we would be invited, and we would go through how to conduct a service. And so he would help us out in how to conduct services. And it was a real great service. They were like almost like surrogate parents to all the foreign students. But it was always so funny because Dennis used to always call his wife honey, honey, honey. But sometimes they would be fighting and he would be upset and he would say, honey, honey. And I found it so ironic that she's using words of endearment, but wasn't in such a sense. But anyways, yeah. So um, as you have all alluded to, you know, I think Shinan Shoni was really truly looked into himself, and so it's only when we understand that Shinran spent 20 years as a monk, and he did try to eradicate all his human defilements or human passions. And yet, what he found as he was practicing on Mount Hiei, the more he practiced, it was almost like the further he was getting from his goal. In a book written by Russell Hamada, who was a minister in the States, almost everything you wanted to know about Buddhism. I think that's what it's titled. Anyways, there's a very short book, but in that book, he gives an analogy of the Kendo sword master and his student. and his student says, if I practice 2 hours a day, how long will it take me to become a master, a Kendo master? And his teacher says, it'll take you 2 years. So of course, then the student asks, well, if I practice 4 hours a day, how long will it take for me to master? And the teacher says, it'll take you 8 years. And it really takes the student back a bit. You would think if you practice twice the amount, you should be able to master it quicker. Then the student says, well, if I practice 6 hours a day, how long will it take me to master? And the teacher says, it'll take you a lifetime. And what this story is telling us is that if you only practice 2 hours, I mean, that even sounds a lot to me, but if you practice 2 hours a day, your expectation of what a master is fairly low. Okay, so you think you know it. But if you practice 4 hours a day, of course, it's what you feel or what you understand becomes that much deeper. And if you practice 6 hours a day, then you begin to realize, to be a master, it's a lifetime endeavor. So in similar sense, Shinran Shoni, the more he practiced, the more he saw his human defilement, his limitations, if you will. And that's when he came down from Mount Hiei at the age of 29 and encountered Honen Shoni. And it was then that he truly understood the Nembutsu teachings, the working of Amida, that basically says, it's not through my doing, but it is through the working of Amida that I receive the sincere mind or the entrusting heart to the sincere mind of Amida. And because it's not my practice, but because it's the working of Amida Buddha, Shinran goes on and says in his Shoshinge, so the next line in this Shoshinge, if we go back to that, he says, when ignorant and wise, even grave offenders and slanderers of the Dharma, all alike turn and enter Shinji. Okay? They are like waters that on entering the ocean become one and taste with it. So here's something that is, again, quite unique to Shinran Shoni and his views or understanding. And we see this in the Tanisho, the notes lamenting the divergence. One would normally think, somebody who's wise and very learned should, of course, become more, they should be higher up. They should have much more merit. They are much more worthy of attaining enlightenment. But Shinran says, the wise and the foolish, they're all the same because it's not their practice that allows them to enter the Pure Land or attain enlightenment. It is through the working of the Buddha, which means that we're all equal. However, there is something that he says here. And by the way, he also mentions about the grave offenders and slanderers of the Dharma. And this grave offenders, it's often referred to as five grave offenses, and those include killing your father, killing your mother, killing an arahat or a monk, and spilling the blood of the Buddha, and creating disharmony within the Sangha, disrupting the Sangha. So these are normally considered what we call 5 grave offenses. And the thing about Buddhism is that you don't have to take it literally. It can be figuratively, So when you think, oh, my father's a pain today, he's bugging me again for something, right? At that point, you're basically creating one of the 5 offenses. You're not killing him physically, but in your thoughts, you're not thinking very nice thoughts about him, right? And we all do this. We all do this. So Shinan says that they all become equal. Okay, there's no difference between the wise and the foolish, even slander, those who are commit the 5 grave offenses, or slanderers of the Dharma. The key words that he uses then next is as they turn and enter Shinjin. And what's often overlooked is this word turn. Okay? Because what this it doesn't just say, Shinan doesn't say is they all are like an enter Shinjin. He says turn and enter Shinjin. Turn is an action. Okay. So in our Jodo Shinshu teachings, there's great emphasis, especially in modern with modern scholars or the Honganji. Yeah, there has been a great emphasis on what we call tariki, other power, other power. Okay. And this whole idea of tariki or other power states that, because it's the working of, it's completely the working of the Buddha, the Dharma working on us, that I don't have anything that is pure or real within me. Everything is left up to the working of the Buddha. And they really look down upon, they call it jiriki, tariki, other power. Jiriki means self-power, okay? And when they talk about jiriki, they're talking about self-calculation, self-motivation, and sometimes they get very, very critical about, anytime you think that you're doing something from your own calculation, this is self-power. But because of that, there's a real propensity, or there's it can handcuff people, because anything you do, it's going to be self-power. It's self-generated. So that's not a good thing. So they say, leave it to the working Amida Buddha. But we see right here in these words, Shinran says, turn and enter Shinjin. Okay? There is an actual conscious action that is taking place. When you turn, you're facing a direction. You're making a conscious effort to face a direction. One of my teachers once mentioned, and I think I've mentioned it before, is that, in order to see your own reflection, there needs to be certain conditions that happen, right? First of all, you need to be in a room that has a mirror in it, and you need a source of light. But you also need to be facing the mirror, right? You need to turn and face the mirror. So if we understand Shinnan's wording here, there is a difference, and many scholars now are coming to the point where they acknowledge this and they think it's very important. There's a difference between what we call self-effort and self-power, okay? So we do need to put effort in. We do need to listen to the Dharma. Okay? If we didn't do that, then you wouldn't be on this Zoom call tonight. It would mean nothing to you. And there's an adage in Japanese, whispering the nembutsu to a horse's ear. Okay? Uma no mimi ni nembutsu. And that means, it's completely useless. I mean, the horse is not going to appreciate the Dharma if they hear it, right? So unless you're also attuned to it, it's not going to mean anything to you. So this effort, self-effort, it's not a calculation. So you're not trying to attain enlightenment per se by this effort. You are making the effort to face the direction to receive the Dharma. Okay? So everything that we do in our temple is a way of helping us focus. So when we do the chanting in the temple. Chanting is an excellent way of focusing. So we start off with chanting because it settles our mind. It gets us into the frame of mind. We're focusing ourselves to listen to the Dharma. When we come into the temple and we sit quietly, we're focusing ourselves to listening to the Dharma. Okay, this is self-effort, and that's important. Okay, so there's a difference between self-power, where you think, okay, I'm going to do all these practices to create merit for myself so that I can attain enlightenment, so I can eradicate all my defilements. Okay, that's self-power. If I'm thinking from a self-centered way or self-calculation, if I do this and this and this will happen. That becomes self-power. And so, but as I mentioned, if we overemphasize this working of the Buddha, some people fear that anything they do can be understood as self-power. But there is a difference between self-effort and self-power. And the turning in this passage, turning and entering, there has to be that will to turn by the individual. And once they do turn, Shinran says, there's no difference between the wise, the foolish, and even the grave offenders and the slanderers. They all enter into the Dharma and become one in taste. They become one. So from the point of view of the ocean, they all become one with it. From Amida's point of view, they become one. It's like the sun shines on everything equally. The sun doesn't say, I'm going to shine on this person a little bit more than this person. It shines on everybody equally. And the Dharma works on everybody equally. Whether we are sensitive to that or not is up to a lot of has to do, is dependent on us. Okay. So, as
May I
I
ask a question, Sensei?
yes,
I was just, this brought something to mind that I read earlier, and in relating to self-power and other power, I was listening to a talk by, I think it's Dr. Takahashi Miyagi, if I've got that right.
oh yeah, Takeshi Miyaji.
Yeah,
Yes.
but he was saying that in our view of other power, it's not relying on being thankful for other people's effort and support and love. It's the individual relying or taking refuge in Amida's salvic working. So if I understood that correctly, the being thankful for things that people do for you and so on is more of an example of interdependence than other power.
Yeah, so and Jodo Shinshu is very specific on that. When they talk about tariki, they reserve it strictly to the working of Amida Buddha. So and it has been misused in a lot of Japanese settings. In particular, one of the most misused areas is in sports. Okay, so when they talk about other power, often when there's a playoff race and one team needs another team to win for them to be able to make it into the playoffs, right? So the sportscasters will often say they have to rely on tariki of the other team, the other power. So the other team has to win their game for this team to enter, and that's really looked down negatively by Jodo Shinshu because they say that's a complete misuse of the terminology of tariki. And you're right, being grateful to others' actions is not. So in Jodo Shinshu specifically, when we talk about tariki, it is reserved for the working of Amida Buddha. So if you're talking about being grateful to others for what they've done, we don't call that tariki. However, in Jodo Shinshu, we say that all the causes and conditions that bring me to the Dharma, to the Amida's teachings, they're called Zen Chishiki, which is a good teacher or friend who has brought me to encounter the Dharma. So you can be grateful to that.
Mhm.
And sometimes it may not be a positive experience. It could even be the passing of a loved one that eventually brings you to the Dharma. And that in itself. So in Japan, there is when fetuses are aborted. Okay, when fetuses are aborted or miscarriage happens, there is they call it mizuko kuyo, and they have a service for this. And in many denominations of Buddhism, they actually say that the infant or the fetus has done something wrong, and therefore you're doing this service to cleanse that infant or to to repair the negative karma that's created by that. But in Jodo Shinshu, we take a completely different look on it, and we say even that aborted fetus can become our good teacher in the sense that the remorse that the parents go through, the mother is going through, but that aborted child, for whatever reason it was, can lead that mother into encountering the teachings because of her remorse. They come, and I've had cases where mothers have come to the temple after an abortion, and I've had to deal with these mothers, and for many of them, when they hear that these fetuses can be good teachers because they are now leading them to reflect on life, reflect on the Dharma. The mothers feel great release and great relief from hearing that because they're so pent up with remorse and guilt before that. So even something very negative can be considered, and it all depends on how the individual takes it, right? You can take your negative experience and realize that, oh, it has led me to an awakening or a path. So so usually when we talk about tariki, specifically in Jodo Shinshu, it's the salvific working of Amida Buddha.
Thank you, Sensei.
You're right. Any other questions or comments? Yvonne, did you want to share anything?
Oh, I don't know if I have a good connection. I'm outside. My internet tower blew over in the storm.
Oh. I hope. Well, it is being recorded, so if you need to see it, you could just
Oh,
go on.
okay.
Okay. Yeah. So if there aren't any other questions, then thank you all for joining us, and we'll continue on from here next time. I know this is very slow, and I apologize, but there's just a lot to go over. So thank you.
Well, thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Sensei.
Sensei.
for your effort.